Hey guys, welcome back to Read Instead. I'm Jake. Glad to have you here today. Today I'm reviewing the 2018 smash hit book by Delia Owens, Where the Crawdads Sing. Stick around. Okay, so what had happened for me, I believe it was back in the spring of this year, I needed to sort of switch things up. I needed a palate cleanser, if you will. I had been reading a lot of historical fiction, sort of medieval books. I was really getting into the Saxon Tales by Bernard Cornwell. I think I had read 2 or 3 of those books in a row, something like that. And I just needed to sort of switch things up. I knew almost nothing about this book. I don't even really read like the inside covers of books and stuff like that. The only extent that I go to find out about the book is I just look at some reviews and I just look at how it's rated. And this is a very highly rated book. My mother and my sister had mentioned that they read it and they enjoyed it. So I picked it up and I got into it. You know, it's interesting when I do these reviews for these books, if I haven't read them in a while, it evokes all the emotions and feelings that I had while reading it after revisiting it after such a long time. It's pretty interesting. I rated this book 4 stars out of 5, and thinking back on it now, I don't know. It should be a five-star rated book from me. Will I go into my Goodreads account and actually change it? I don't know, but I am going to tell you what this book is about. So first of all, there are 2 alternating timelines that go back and forth. It's basically from the early 50s, like 1952, a story, and basically that is it's the growing up story and the introduction to our main character. And then it flips back and forth to the late 60s, and that is sort of an ongoing murder mystery and investigation that ends up centering around her. And this girl that I'm talking about, the main protagonist, the main character in this book, is a girl named Kaya, otherwise known as the Marsh Girl. Why is she called the Marsh Girl? This girl, Kaya, you get introduced to her, and she lives in rural marshland, North Carolina. That's where this book takes place. And it gives you a nice little map right in the beginning of the book, which is very helpful and something you can always reference, because she does a lot of moving around all over the marsh area, and that map is very helpful. But who is Kaya? Kaya comes from a family, and the head of this family is a father that is extremely abusive. Right in the beginning of this book, there's a scene where Kaya is just sort of out in the front area of her property, playing, enjoying herself as a little girl, and she just sees her mother walk out the front door with a suitcase and just walks up the road. And that is sort of the last time that she sees her mother. And then as time progresses, she's the youngest of she has multiple siblings. And as time progresses, each one of those siblings, one by one, starts to leave. A couple of the siblings, it's very difficult because they love her, they love Kaya, but they just can't take the abusive nature of their father anymore, so they end up leaving. You get to a point where it's just Kaya and her father, and then after that, her father leaves her, and that leaves her alone in this little ruddy shack, basically. Very poor people. It's a family that is in poverty, except there's no more family anymore because Kaya is just alone by herself. And instead of, this is the 1950s, I'm sure child services and DCF and stuff was a little different back then. Nobody really got a hold of her, and she ends up sort of surviving and maintaining just on her own as a very small girl. You fall in love quickly with this character, Kaya. One reason is because you can't help but have compassion on her because of what she has endured through her family and what has ultimately left her completely alone. But her resiliency is so admirable. As a little girl, she figures out how to, make food for herself and survive gathering nourishment and stuff like that. She also figures out little kind of crafty ways to make money. But one thing that happens to Kaya that is absolutely pivotal into making her the person that she is that she connects with nature around her. She connects with this marshland that she grows up in, and the marshland that surrounds her. And that basically becomes her family that had otherwise left her. This marshland, the nature, the birds, the trees, the shoreline, the rocks, everything. She becomes one with this area. So a big chunk of this book, I would say almost half of this book, is just you continuing on this journey with Kaya as she grows up. She becomes a teenager and stuff like this, and she becomes her own person. And because she had to take on this form of survival, it makes her, although she's obviously less educated than your average 13 or 14-year-old girl that lives maybe in town, not in the marshlands, she's actually more mature in a lot of ways too. So it was interesting, like, the compassion that you start out with because of the circumstance in which we find Kaya in. I actually, as time went on, and you see how connected she is to this marshland and this area around her, I became, as the reader, somewhat envious of her and her relationship with the nature around her. She is just so in tune. She is one with the setting around her. One of the cool things that she does is she becomes sort of a bird expert, and she keeps a little scrapbook of different feathers, and she knows so much about these birds. She knows obviously what kind of bird all these feathers are connected to, what bird they're connected to, and she knows the characteristics and the mating seasons and the different sort of like gender roles that these birds take on and stuff. She becomes very intelligent because she's just constantly in these marshlands, this sort of conservation area, if you will, to herself, and she takes in a lot. She takes in a lot of information. Okay, so flipping ahead now to that late 60s, early 70s timeline that's going on. What ends up happening is it turns out that Kaya is actually a very beautiful and attractive girl. And once in a great while, she does actually have to go into town and buy some sort of household needs. And on one of these trips, as she's going into town, a local sort of high school football player, jock guy, takes notice of her. And as a lot of the kids are kind of snickering, calling her the marsh girl and making fun of her and stuff like that, he, obviously is sort of smitten by her and her beauty. And he takes it upon himself to, go seek her out in the marshland and stuff like that. And I don't want to give too much away as to how he treats her or what his, how pure his motives and intentions were. I'll leave that up to you to figure out. But he is found dead. This kid is ultimately found dead at the bottom of a like an electrical tower, and one that you can climb up. There is a investigation that starts to take place, and because of sort of the town's prejudice against Kaya, she was always sort of looked at as weird, and people were kind of freaked out by her. Some townspeople knew that this boy had been seen with her and that they'd spent some time together, so the authorities sort of target in on her. So I hope that gives you sort of the baseline foundation of the book. You have one timeline of Kaya, her family, and how she ends up alone, and her sort of coming of age story, and how she becomes sort of the young adult that she becomes. And then the other timeline story, if you will, that murder investigation, and how she sort of navigates her way through that. Okay, the next thing that I wanted to share with you guys, and you have heard me mention this thing before in past reviews. I've talked to you guys before about how a setting, a geographical location in a novel can almost act as a character. It can have a personality. And that setting, that geographical location, can play a pivotal role in the actual plotting out of the story. There's no greater example of that, what I just laid out to you, than what takes place in this book right here. Delia Owens, and I want to talk about her also. I will at the end of this video. I'll talk about her, but she writes these marshlands of North Carolina so beautifully. And that's, even now thinking back on it, you know, I read this book 6 or 7 months ago. Above the plot, above even me getting to know Kaya and really liking her and connecting with her more than anything else, this book just paints a beautiful picture of those marshlands. It romanticizes these marshlands and everything, the whole ecosystem that takes place within these marshlands. And I just remember it was so beautiful to read. You know, I've never been to the marshland. I've been to North Carolina, but I've never been to the marshlands of North Carolina. And you know, I knew nothing about it, but I'll tell you, I learned a lot about it, and it's almost like I want to go down there and see it. It's just so, it's so riveting how, again, how Delia Owens writes the scenery in this book. Speaking of Delia Owens, at the end of this book, and I'm not really spoiling anything for you, but at the end of this book, when I read the note from the author, or about the author, about Delia Owens, I couldn't believe it. This is the only novel I believe that she's ever, well, this was her first novel anyway. I don't know if she's written one since. First of all, when I first read that, I was just shocked because she's a very skilled writer. But then I was almost pleasantly surprised, but it makes sense to learn what Delia Owens, who she is as a person. She is a wildlife conservationist and has been for a long, long time. If I remember correctly, she's spent a lot of time in Africa in certain conservations and whatnot out there. So it made sense to me that she could write scenery, and she could write the detailed description of the marshlands of North Carolina the way she did. It made perfect sense that a environmentalist, a conservationist, someone who works in this field, you know, could paint that picture so well. So when I picked this book up, like I said at the beginning of this video, I needed a palate cleanser. I needed a change of pace, something a little different than I usually read, and I was very, very satisfied. And this turned out to be, you know, one of the best books that I've read this year. So we'll see if it ends up on my top 10 list at the end of this year, 2024. But aside from that, I would recommend this book highly to anyone. It was very entertaining to read, and it's beautiful. It's you really connect with this place. You connect with this person, Kaya, and you connect with the beauty of these marshlands of North Carolina. So definitely a highly recommended book from me. Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. I'll see you guys next time.